Okay, that's working. Hey guys, this video plans got changed just a little bit on it because it originally was just going to be a full-on Birds of Prey program, but we're going to have the usual kind of Q&A here at the beginning, answering a few questions, and most of the questions I'm going to be answering today would be the majority of them that I got this week, and pretty much all of them were about the video we had a few days ago over traits and adaptations. So the first few things we're going to be talking about is going over the traits and adaptations again. Not in as much detail as we did the video, mostly just answering the question. And the biggest questions were, what are some better examples of traits of an animal versus adaptations of an animal? So over here, I actually do have a little guest with me that we're going to be using to better talk about and show some of the differences between traits and adaptations. This is a little baby possum, and what we're going to be mostly using him for is to show off different traits. And remember, in the video when we talked about the differences between traits and adaptations, what we said were traits are something that is mostly physical. There's something very physical you can see about that animal. And they're usually actual body parts. It's going to be something physically connected rather than a physiological, a physical trait or a biological trait. So when we're talking about traits instead of adaptations, I said we're going to use Waffles here as an example. Take a good look at his paws. Now, whenever we're dealing with our possums, possums are very well known for being excellent climbers and also having really good grip strength. And if you look at his back paw right here, you can kind of see a specific trait that helps him kind of achieve this. And that would be this little tiny thumb right here. You can notice that it's positioned well away from the rest of his feet, and you can kind of see it when he grabs my fingers. That thumb wraps around just like ours does. It makes it a lot easier for them to hold on and grip. Another specific trait that the possum has is also its tail. And whenever I touch his tail, you can already see how it's reacting. It just instantly curls around my finger, and that also helps him grip. So those are two traits that are very specific. Now, if we were talking about adaptations, we would mostly be talking about their biological traits. So adaptation of a possum in a very dark environment would be really, really well-developed eyes for mostly night vision. Traits, physical features, like the thumb on the possum and that tail used for gripping. Things that we can actually see happening, and we don't have to be in like a lab or anything to kind of see. So I just wanted to use Waffles here as an example just to kind of show that. And for anybody that watches this at a later time that's wondering why we have a possum, we did not just go outside and capture this possum. I want to make that clear real quick. All those storms that we had, these possums were found with their mother, and the mother could not be saved. All the babies were kind of left alone. So we've been taking care of this little one. And the other ones are also being taken care of. We just couldn't take care of every single one, obviously. So we just have little Waffles here. But I just wanted to kind of take the time to better explain myself on the traits and adaptations and give an actual physical example. So with all of that out of the way, we're going to get on with our actual topic of today, which is one of my personal favorite programs to do, one that I do quite often, and that is Birds of Prey. Just a little background. The reason this is my favorite program to do, and the reason our raptors, specifically our owls, are my favorite thing to talk about, is because they're how I got started in all of this. Back before I even started natural resource management at UTM, I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I needed volunteer hours for my scholarship. So my old roommate at the time sent me over to Professor Dr. Smart at UTM. He sent me over to NAI, and the first thing NAI had me do for those volunteer hours and to kind of get started in this program was to stand outside of Brim Hall and hold an owl on my arm for several hours, which was something I never thought about before. And that made me fall in love with the program, fall in love with kind of working in state parks and programming. So raptors and birds of prey, especially raptor programming, is really sentimental to me as well, and that's why I really love doing it. They're also just awesome animals. Owls are some of our most perfect and most well-built hunters that we're going to find. Usually when people think of really well-built hunting animals, wolves, bears, cheetahs, lions, kind of like the big, mean-looking mammals, usually what comes to mind. Surprisingly, though, an owl or even a hawk, but we're going to mostly just talk about owls today, are more perfectly built specifically for hunting. And the kind of theme that I like to do with this program is, even though owls are really cool to look at, they're really, really cute. My theme with this program, I kind of want to get people away from that kind of thinking. These are awesome animals to look at. Yes, they are cute, but I want to kind of get people away from that, and I want people to start looking at owls for what they actually are, which is incredibly well-built killing machines. So, we're going to be going over a few things with our raptors. We're going to first talk about how they hunt. We're going to talk about how they're equipped specifically to hunt. We're going to talk about diet. We're going to talk about habitat. And then we're going to go over calls just a little bit, but not too much on calls. And the owl that we're going to kind of focus on is the barred owl. The reason I want to focus on the barred owl is because this is the most common owl. Whenever you're walking around outside and you're hearing an owl call, 9 times out of 10 it's going to be a barred owl. And they're also usually the ones that are most commonly seen. So I kind of like to focus on them, just because they're the one people are more familiar with. But we are still going to mention the 4 owls that we have native to Tennessee. Now here recently, there has been a lot of talk about some non-native species of owls that have started to move over. If they stay, I don't know. If they're going to end up leaving, I have no idea. But we're not going to talk about them at all today. I just wanted to mention that just in case there might be some confusion. Because if you Google Tennessee owls right now, it's going to be kind of a mixture and a melting pot. Last time I looked it up, they even had Eurasian eagle owl on there, which is an owl that we do not have native to Tennessee. But it is a very popular programming owl in Tennessee. A lot of zoos and interpretation specialists and falconers have Eurasian eagle owls, but they're not native. So the 4 owls that are actually native to our side of Tennessee in general, you have your barred owl, which we already mentioned. You have your great horned owl. You have the barn, B-A-R-N owl. I always spell that out because people cannot tell what I'm saying with my accent, if it's barn or barn. So B-A-R-N. And then you have your eastern screech owl. And with the eastern screech owl, sometimes there is a little bit of confusion thinking that there are 2 different species of screech owl. They're not 2 separate species, they're different variants. They're both eastern screech owls, but they come in different colors. You can find the eastern screech owl in a really nice looking kind of rusty orange or a gray. They're the same species, just different variants, different colors. So, 4 species: barred, B-A-R-R-E-D, great horned owl, barn, B-A-R-N, and the eastern screech owl. Now, the first thing that we're going to go over, and let me just grab this real quick. I did say that we would not be able to have a living owl. And at first I didn't even plan to have a living possum to use for this program. That was just kind of a happy circumstance, or a happy accident. But what I do have is this puppet right here. And these puppets are absolutely amazing, by the way, if you're ever wanting to get into wildlife programming. A lot of places, when you do wildlife programming, you're going to have to do outreach programs, which is going away from the main place that you work at and, say, going to a school or a hospital. Some places aren't going to allow living animals, but they're still going to want that wildlife programming. There's a company called Wildlife Interpretive, or I think it was called Wildlife Interpretive. I'll have to look that back up just to double check. I think that's the company where I got this. I'll double check and then leave its name in the comments to this video or in a separate post so everybody can get it. But these puppets are a little bit pricey, but they're fully functional. The head moves, the wings, my hands are really tiny so I can't do it, but if your hands are big enough, you can make the wings move around. The head rotates the proper degrees that an owl can actually move, and I don't know how well it shows up on camera, but the eyes also blink. And there's a little pouch inside. You can put a speaker to play the calls like an actual owl. So they're a little bit pricey. This one ran me about $90, but they're awesome for doing programs like this. So the other sections of our state, again, we mostly only got those main four. When you get to the states that are closer to some of the borders of Tennessee, you will start to see some other species, and it's kind of like where we see bears, cougars, mountain lions. We'll see non-native species cross the border of Tennessee all the time. One of them that we're seeing over, like people are saying that seeing over moving into Reelfoot right now, is the short-eared owl. And that's an owl that's been kind of seen all over Tennessee. They're not native yet. From what I understand and from my own research looking into them, they're starting to fly over again like the bears and everything. They'll cross over, stay for just a little bit, and then find out this isn't their habitat. They might not be able to survive here, and then they'll leave. So the border states, you're going to see a lot more species of owl, but they're not going to stick around. In Tennessee, you're always going to see the four owls that we talked about. And if the short owl ends up sticking around, we'll see. I'm kind of interested to see what that's going to do to the native habitat and ecosystem if it does move in. Because, and we're going to talk about that here in a second, owls have a really weird kind of diet. But for today's program, we're going to be using Owlecia here as a little example. So this puppet is based off of the great horned owl. This company does not make a puppet for a barred owl, sadly, so just pretend this is a barred owl. But owls, amazing hunters. They have a lot of features that help them specifically survive on a hunt-based diet. Now, the first thing people usually notice about owls are the eyes and the beak. And we're going to talk about the eyes first. The first thing that people usually notice about the eyes, and it really doesn't show up well on camera, so I'll move it closer. It really doesn't show up well. Sorry about that. But the first thing people usually notice when we're dealing with owls are the eyes. Specifically, the size of them. And owls' eyes are massive. And that's for a number of reasons. First thing we've got to really realize with owls are they're labeled nocturnal. Now, nocturnal, its actual scientific meaning has kind of gotten jumbled up. Not really recently, just in general. Nocturnal does not mean they sleep all day and only come out at night. What nocturnal actually means is that during the day, they're not sleeping. They're going to kind of move around. They're going to find the area that they want to settle down in and kind of scope out and see if this is a good area for hunting. So usually what they're going to do is fly to a pretty high tree. They're going to see if there's any competition around, make sure there's a good food source, and then wait until night. And the reason they wait until night is because mammals are considered nocturnal. We see mammals all the time during the day, though. And you're also going to see owls during the day if you know where to look. Nocturnal, again, does not mean they sleep all day, only come out at night. If you want a really good example of this, I actually have a few pictures that I don't mind sending y'all when I worked at Natchez Trace last summer. We were finding bats out and about during the day, which bats are one of those animals people never think of seeing during the day, but you can find them. You just got to know where to look. And the bats we were finding at Natchez Trace were in the bathrooms. And our bathrooms, by the way, were pretty much open at the top. They had a roof and walls, but instead of windows, it was open air. So light got in. But anyway, the owl's eyes. They're huge for a few different reasons. And again, night vision is the main one, but it's not the only one. Few things about the eyes that we got to realize. One, when we think about an eyeball, we think about a literal ball, like a marble. That's what pretty much every mammal's eye is going to look like. When we get to our owls, however, they're not marbles. They actually look like a cone. Think of a light bulb. There's a circle around the top, then the further back on that eye you get, it starts to taper off, shaped like a cone or a light bulb. And what that is for greater eye development. Those muscles go right into the back of the skull. And what that does, it gives it excellent night vision. Now, when we talk about night vision with our owls, we're not talking about perfect color. Instead, they have ultraviolet night vision, which basically just means whenever it's night and they're looking at something, it looks like a well-lit room. They see things in super bright grays, whites, or kind of shaded blacks. During the day, everything's going to just be super bright colors. Not exactly like neon, just really bright. It's going to be brighter than what we see. And during the night, that helps them see things so they can hunt. During the day, same thing. It'll help them hunt because if we look at things like a mouse running around in the grass, that grass is going to be a lot brighter to the owl than the mouse. So it's going to be able to spot that mouse in the grass a lot easier. At night, well-lit room. What's really cool about the owl, though, and we're going to talk about this in a second, eyesight is not their strongest hunting feature. And we'll get to that here in just a minute. I want to talk about the eyes just a little bit more. One of the problems that owls are going to find with their eyes being built like this, however, one of the cons, we can look up, down, left, right. We can roll our eyes around. They are completely mobile. And owls' eyes are stationary. They cannot move. So the owl has to have a few other traits to kind of overcome this so that they'll still be able to hunt. And we talked about this in our previous video when we talked about the mammals. Or no, it was in our traits and adaptations video, excuse me. And it's their head movement. Because their eyes aren't able to move, they have to be able to have almost unlimited head movement. A common misconception about owls is that they can move 360 degrees. They cannot. If the owl moved his head 360 degrees from here all the way around and back, all those muscles, tendons, veins, and the bone itself would get twisted up, and that would not be a good day for the owl. He would probably not survive that. It would be a bad day. No, they can only move 270 degrees at the max. Now, the reason this is important, again, immovable eyes. So with this 270 degree movement, they're able to look behind them. They're able to look either way behind them over both shoulder blades and just kind of scan around. So they have to have this to be able to survive. That's one of their features that helps them hunt. Now, I said that the eyesight wasn't their strongest hunting feature, and it's not. And I'm going to put him down for a second so I can get the skull to better show you this. Their strongest hunting feature is actually their hearing. If you'll notice on the back of the skull, these two bones are crooked. Right here. One is lower than the other. And that is where his auditories would connect, or his ears. So, here's what we're going to think about. If we were an owl, our ears are on either side of our head. If we were an owl, one ear would be up here, the other ear would be a little bit lower, kind of near the bottom of our jaw, just like this. And here's what's really fascinating about owls and why that's important. And here's why their hearing is so incredible. If you look up GIFs, or GIFs, whatever you want to call it, of owls, you're always going to find an image of an owl moving his head around like this. He's not dancing and looking cute. He's doing two things. One, he's adjusting his eyes. When they do this, they're zooming their eyes in and out, getting better depth perception. But even more important than that, they're scooping the sound into their upper ear and then scooping it again into their lower ear when they go down. So they're scooping it into their higher, then when they come down and go again, they're scooping the sound into their lower. And they have hardened bristle feathers around their face, which help them guide that sound into each of their ears. Why is that important? What the owl is doing when it's bobbing its head like this and collecting sound is it's actually doing math. An owl is able to take the sound in its upper and lower earlobes and calculate how many miles away that sound is based on the seconds that sound takes to get from one earlobe to the other. They can calculate distance by hearing the sound that way. And that is why their hearing is a lot more well developed and a lot more important than their eyesight. They can differentiate a mouse running through the grass compared to wind blowing the grass or blowing the leaves. They can tell the difference from miles away without ever seeing it. So whenever they hear that mouse or that food running through the grass and the leaves, they're going to move to a different tree so then they can then try to see it. Their hearing is the most important and strongest part of our owl when they're hunting. But there's something even stronger than that. But before I move on to that, since there are a few people in here, I want to make sure nobody has any questions before we move on too much further. And I also wanted to get a drink of tea. Thanks, Tina. All right. Yes, so they actually can. They can not perfectly triangulate, but they can tell how far away it is, in which direction, in which area they need to go in. So let's say that they're up in a tree, a mouse is several yards away, and it moves. The owl's going to be able to hear it move closer, and they'll be able to find a general area where that mouse could be. Then they sit and they just stare, and they bob their head again so that they can listen more and zoom their eyes in and out to find that movement. So it's not perfect triangulation, but they can tell it's somewhere in this small circle. And then they'll be able to find it. And the reason I like talking about the hearing and that they're able to calculate like that, there is, I don't know if it's still popular. When I was a kid and when I was growing up with my friends and my sisters, let me fix that. There we go. Camera kept wiggling. A very popular insult was bird brain. And yes, that is the same with all owls. Now, not every owl's hearing is as developed. Some owls have better hearing than other owls. But this is a universal feature for our owls. But the reason I like talking about this, and the reason I mentioned bird brain, when I was growing up, that was a popular insult, and it meant stupid. I think it's a compliment, because I would not be able to bob my head around, hear sound, do quick math based on seconds, and tell how many miles away something is. Birds are incredibly intelligent. You can look up the Arizona firehawk, which is a bird that will actually spread fire. If there's a forest fire, it will spread it in a circle and then hunt the animals that are trapped inside of it. Birds are not dumb. We have seen birds even make tools. So no, birds are they're not ignorant at all. And before we move on to the next topic, I just wanted to once again show y'all how the eyes of an owl move into the back of his skull. Because you can see the socket right here completely encases every bit of the eye except the front. And it goes straight back. So even if it did happen to move his eye to the side, it would see nothing but eye socket. That's why we have to have that movement, that 270 degrees. And in case anybody wasn't here for the last video or forgot, the reason they have that 270 degree movement, mammals have two bones on the side of their neck, which are these right here, called your occipital condyles. And those serve a numbers of purposes. One of them, it locks the skull into place, and it keeps the skull from getting stuck when we move. It limits our movement when we have them on either side. An owl has one, and it's itty bitty. That little protrusion right there. And theirs is located in the front. So it doesn't limit their head movement as well. Any more questions before we move on? That's really good tea. All right. So I don't see any more questions, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next feature of an owl. And the next most important feature. Well, two of them actually. The beak and the talons. Now, here's another one of those misconceptions that I like to kind of talk about. And that is the use of the beak compared to the talons. A lot of times, it's a common thought that the beak is what does all the killing. It actually doesn't. An owl's beak, not that strong. I've been bitten by plenty of owls. Not as painful as you would think. It hurts, but not that bad. Getting stabbed by the talons or having an owl clench on your arm, however, very painful. So, I said we're going to focus on our barred owl, and I'm going to use our barred owl as an example to talk about this. All of the killing comes from the talons. In each of those talons, a fully grown barred owl, fully grown female barred owl, has up to 300 PSI. That's pounds per square inch of pressure. And that's squeezing force. That is the basic equivalent of laying your arm out on the pavement and letting somebody run it over with a car. They have incredible squeezing power in each of those talons. And that mostly has to do with the way that they're made. They have kind of a locking joint mechanism. And once they clench, it takes a lot to get them to let go. So what they're going to do, they're usually going to fly over their prey, that mouse, rabbit. And we're going to talk about diet here in a minute because I've been saying mouse a lot. And I want to see if you guys might catch on if mouse might be all they eat. Mice. If mice might be all they eat. But the owl's going to kind of hover over, and it's going to swoop down on that mouse. And what an owl does, it hardly ever comes for food from the front, if it can help it. It's usually always going to come from above or directly behind. But it's going to swoop down, and it's going to just grab the food off the ground. And that yanking force, along with the squeeze that it does, is usually enough to kill it right off the bat. Because that's an instant 300 pounds of squeeze in each talon. Now, the reason I said a fully grown female instead of a fully grown male or just a fully grown owl, females are a lot bigger. Owls have what we call gender dominance, and this is true for mammals and our raptors. The female is always going to be a lot larger, and that's for a number of reasons. With our owls, the female has to be larger. One, the female carries the eggs, lays the eggs, and usually stays back and protects the nest. So because the female's staying back and protecting the nest, it needs to be a lot bigger. It has to be a lot bigger and a lot stronger so it can do all the fighting and actually protect the young. The male is going to be a lot smaller and not as strong, mostly just due to the size. The reason the male's a lot smaller, all the male is good for is reproduction and going out and catching the food. Because of that, it needs to be a lot quieter, a lot smaller, so it can get through and get the food a lot easier. And it can be a lot quieter. The same, like I said, is true for mammals, but I can talk about that at a different time. Now, all that power in the talons, once it squeezes it, if just that squeezing and yanking it off the ground isn't enough to break the bones, the talons do the rest. And those talons are incredibly sharp. They can pierce through pretty much anything that they get their claws into. Now the beak doesn't actually do much killing at all. If, for some reason, the animal survives the talons, the squeezing, the yanking off the ground, then they'll just sever the spine with that beak. All the beak is there for is eating. So, with our owl, what we see, let's see if you can You can kind of see it on the puppet. I'll hold the skull up instead. It's a little bit better on the camera. What we notice about the beak is it's kind of spoon-shaped. It's a scoop. And that's purposeful. One of the reasons it's this shape is to stay out of the way of the eyes, since the eyes are locked in front of the face. But also, when it bites into the food, it's scooping up a portion that is big enough to be wholesome, but not too big to choke them. It's designed to scoop the perfect piece of meat. And they swallow it whole. They do not chew, because what you're going to notice, owls have no teeth. None of our birds, specifically none of our raptors, have teeth. They swallow their food whole. And after they swallow it whole, they store it in a specialized pouch located about right here called their creel. And what that does after they swallow that food, let me correct myself real quick because I did explain that wrong. They swallow their food whole, fur, bones, and all. And what comes back up is what they can't digest, and that's what they store in their creel, not the food itself. So I'm sorry about getting that confused. But all the fur, the bones, claws, teeth come back up and get stored in that creel, and then they just vomit that back up like a hairball. That's why owl pellets are a very popular thing with biology classes. So, that's just a few things about what makes an owl such a good hunter. The next thing I want to talk about before I get to kind of the calls, what to listen for, is their wings. Because their wings are also designed to make them flawless and perfect hunters. These wings, their feathers, what you're going to notice if you ever watch an owl or listen to an owl fly, you're not going to hear anything. An owl's feathers have what's called flutings at the very end. And if you look at a feather under a microscope or just look up pictures of flutings, you'll see this. But it's kind of Velcro-shaped little extrusions at the end of the feather. And they're called flutings. What they do, if anything moves through the air at pretty much any speed, you're going to hear it move. What you're hearing is turbulence. An owl's wing is designed with those flutings to erase turbulence and instead make what's called microturbulence. Microturbulence is something that we cannot hear. The only way we're ever going to hear microturbulence is if it's right next to our ear. It is at too high of a frequency. And their wings are designed so that they are incredibly silent when they fly. Now, if an owl gets excited and it flaps its wings, you're going to hear the flap. But once it takes off and flies, you're not going to hear a thing. They're silent gliders. Now, before we finish up the video, I did say that I was going to mention the calls a little bit. And the reason I want to mention the calls, owls are kind of like ducks. Not every duck quacks. Not every owl sounds like a perfect hoot. So, the barred owl is the first one I want to go over because it's the most common, the one that people usually hear the most. And the barred owl's call has been so common that it has its own translation, which is who cooks for you. Then there's a follow-up call, who cooks for you all. And right there we heard both the who cooks for you and then the who cooks for you all. A very specific call. Now let's compare that to our great horned owl. What you're going to see, the great horned owl sounds more like your normal hoot, but that's not the only call it has. There are a bunch of other calls. But the main difference, the barred owl compared to the great horned owl is a little bit deeper. It comes more from the diaphragm, where our barred owl, a little bit higher pitched. Now let's compare that to our barn, B-A-R-N owl. A whole lot different, because again, not every owl hoots. And the barn owl is one of those. The barn owl actually has a funny story, and The barn owl, I want to mention this real quick. Our next time, well, I'll mention that afterwards. The last owl that we're going to compare is our screech owl, which again, a lot different. Not a hoot. So, owls' calls are unique, and they don't all hoot. That's all that we have for today, guys. Now, before we wrap up the video, like always, I kind of want to talk about our next topic. And the next topic that we're going to have is going to be our settlement period superstitions and kind of their history and legends. And the reason I mentioned the barn owl ties in very heavily with some of our 1800 settlement period superstitions for a lot of really fun reasons. So that's going to be the topic that we're going to talk about either in a day or two, maybe sometime next week. It really just depends on how my school load looks this week, but it's definitely going to be sometime between Monday and Friday is when our next video is going to be. So look out for that. Like always, if y'all had any questions that I didn't get to during the video, either message me or leave them in the comments, and I'll either answer them in the next video or answer them in a message. And that's all I have for you guys. So thank y'all for joining.